The door opened without a knock. Elena had learned, in 26 years of living, that the doors which opened without a knock were always the ones that changed everything. She was wrapping white roses when they came in. Two men, dark coats despite the July heat outside, as if weather was something that happened to other people. Faces that had long ago arrived at a settled blankness and stayed there. They did not speak right away. They stood inside her small shop on the corner of Via dei Fiori and looked at her the way men look at a problem they have already decided how to handle. "Miss Vasquez," the taller one said. "Mr. Ricci would like a word." Elena set the roses down slowly. Her hands did not shake. They had not shaken in 3 years, not since she had quietly and deliberately trained them out of it, the way she had trained herself to sleep on the left side of the bed, near the wall, instead of the middle, the way she had trained herself to sit facing the door in every room she entered, the way she kept her sleeves pulled to her wrists even now, even in this thick July heat, with sweat on the back of her neck, and the cooler in the back room, the only thing standing between the flowers and the afternoon. Old habits, useful ones. She had stopped thinking of them as habits, and started thinking of them as simply the way she moved through the world. "I have a shop to close," she said. "We will wait," the tall one said, and they did. They stood near the door without fidgeting while she locked the cash drawer, while she turned off the back cooler, while she put on her linen jacket even though it was 30 degrees outside, and the fabric settled, warm and familiar, against her arms. They did not hurry her. They did not check a phone or shift their weight, or give any indication that time was a resource they were spending. They simply waited with the complete patience of men for whom waiting was a skill rather than an inconvenience. That was somehow more frightening than if they had been impatient. A man who hurries you is afraid of something. A man who waits already knows how this ends. She turned off the shop light. She stood in the dim and looked for a moment at the roses she had not finished wrapping. White, long-stemmed, for an anniversary order that was supposed to be ready for collection at 6. Someone would come in and they would not be there, and that person would stand at the counter with their hands empty, and Elena felt a small, precise guilt about this that had nothing to do with the actual size of what was happening. Her mind was doing what it always did under pressure, finding the small and solvable thing, pointing at it, using it as a way to stand still for one more second before walking into what came next. She left the roses. She put the keys in her pocket. She followed the two men out. The street was ordinary. A vendor 2 doors down was arguing the price of peaches with a woman in a blue apron, a dispute they would have again tomorrow and enjoy about equally. A group of children ran past the car without a glance. A man sat on the steps opposite reading a newspaper with complete attention. The city had no idea. Naples never had any idea. It simply continued, enormous and indifferent and beautiful, going about its life regardless of what any individual within it was being asked to do. The drive was 20 minutes. No one spoke. She sat on her side of the back seat and watched the city move past the windows in the amber of early evening, the streets filling with the particular mood of a place that knows how to enjoy itself at the end of a long day. She did very careful, very quiet calculations about what was coming. She knew the name Ricci. Everyone in Naples knew the name Ricci. You did not need to be involved in anything particular to know it. It was the kind of name that moved through a city the way weather moved through it. You felt it coming, and you adjusted your plans accordingly. Sensible people maintained distance. People without the sense for distance sometimes discovered why sensible people kept it. Most people simply went about their lives and were grateful not to be relevant. Her father had not been a sensible person. He had believed proximity to power was itself a kind of power, and he had pursued it. And he had been wrong in the way people who believe that are almost always, eventually, wrong. Elena had spent 3 years living inside that wrongness, quietly and alone and without telling anyone, and she was still living inside it when the door of her shop opened without a knock. The villa was at the end of a private road lined with cypress trees, standing dark and straight against the evening sky. It was beautiful in the way things built with real money were beautiful when taste accompanied the money. White stone. Iron lanterns lit at the gate even now, in summer, high windows, and in the courtyard she could see as the car passed through the gate, actual flowers, planted in beds with depth and real intention. Someone had cared enough about those beds to build them properly. Elena noticed this with the specific attention she gave to things that told her something true about a person, the things they were willing to spend real care on when no one was watching to record the expenditure. She was taken inside through a corridor that smelled of old wood and beeswax and something faintly citrus, and then shown into a study. It had the feel of a room where important things happened regularly. Dark shelves organized with genuine use, not decoration. A desk that was old and substantial, dark with age, the kind of object selected to communicate something deliberate about permanence. One lamp burning, throwing a warm, precise pool across the desktop. 2 chairs placed across from the desk, with the attention of someone who had thought about where chairs ought to be. And the man behind the desk. Dante Ricci was 34 years old, and he looked like someone who had been under continuous pressure since before he was old enough to understand what pressure was. He was not wearing a jacket. His shirt was dark, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a working shirt on a man who was working. He was reading a document when Elena was brought in, and he did not look up immediately. He finished the paragraph he was reading. He made a small notation in the margin with his pen. He set the pen down. Then he looked at her. She understood that the pause was deliberate. She also understood that a deliberate pause was only a technique on a person waiting for it to end. She settled into the chair with the composure of someone who had no particular investment in the silence ending, and looked at him. He was not what she had been building in the car. She had constructed a version of him from the name and the name's reputation, and she had been wrong in several specific ways. He was younger than expected. The hardness she had anticipated was present, but it was not brittle or angular. It was dense, the way certain things that had been under pressure for a long time became denser, not sharper. "Sit down," he said. She was already sitting. She did not point this out. He reached into the folder on his desk and turned it to face her. Numbers and dates, and her father's name, Tomás Vázquez, printed at the top in clean black type. A figure below it that she read without expression. 3,240,000 euros. Below that, a column of entries spanning 4 years, each one a record of something taken from one place and moved to another. "Your father," Dante said, "was a very skilled liar." Elena said nothing. This was true information. Her father had been a skilled liar about many things for most of the time she had known him. She had come to understand this, not all at once but in accumulated pieces, over a childhood she had spent long enough away from to see with something approaching clarity. The lying was structural. He had not lied about particular things. He had built a version of himself that was a lie, which meant that everything flowing from that version was also, at its foundation, false. Children often understood this before they had words for it. She had. "He worked with my family for 4 years, Dante said, his voice carrying the particular level quality of a man accustomed to delivering difficult information without inflection. He managed accounts, he moved money, he made introductions. He was good at all of it. He was trusted, and the trust was not accidental. He built it deliberately over a long time before he began to use it for other purposes. By the time the pattern was identified, he had taken just over 3 million euros and placed it somewhere we were not able to locate." A pause. "And then he died. Her father died of a heart attack 18 months ago in his apartment. A neighbor found him in the morning. Elena had flown in from Naples, managed the funeral arrangements with the compressed efficiency she brought to things she did not want to feel too much while still feeling them, and then spent 2 weeks afterward going through every corner of his apartment with the systematic attention of someone who already suspected she was not going to like what she found. She had not found 3 million euros. She had found a shoebox behind a loose panel in the bedroom closet, containing a second ledger and a list of names and figures that told her, in plain and unsentimental language, the actual shape of what her father had been doing for many years. She had sat with this for a long time in the apartment that still smelled of him, and then she had made a plan. The plan was 3 years of quiet, careful, solitary work. She had paid the names on the list, one by one, using everything she earned from the flower shop, and everything she had managed to save. She had done this without telling anyone, not because she felt she owed it, morally or legally, but because she was the one who could see it, and she was constitutionally incapable of living inside a visible mess that she had a way to address. She had not found 3 million euros because she did not believe it was findable. Her father had been a man of appetites who had always been certain the next opportunity was just ahead. She believed the money had been spent at roughly the rate it arrived. He had not been saving it. He had been living it. "I understand the debt," she said, "but I do not have 3 million euros. "No," Dante agreed. "You do not." He leaned back in his chair. His hands rested on the desktop, open and still. Outside, somewhere deeper in the house, she could hear the sounds of a household in its evening, voices at a distance. Footsteps on stone, the ordinary life of a large residence going about itself. It felt very far from the silence inside this room. There are 7 families operating in this region, he said. They have been watching my family for 2 years. They are watching for a weakness, a sign that a debt can go uncollected. A man who cannot collect what is owed to him is a man whose word means nothing, and a man whose word means nothing has already lost his position, whether or not anyone has formally said so. He looked at her steadily. Your father made a fool of my family. The settlement of that requires something that can be seen, something that every watching eye can understand without a translator. The cold arrived before he finished. You will become my wife, he said. Same tone as everything else, the tone of a man delivering information rather than asking for response. Not in name only. You will live here. You will appear at every function that requires my presence. You will conduct yourself, in every observed context, as a full member of this family. At the end of 2 years, the message will have been received, and the account considered settled, and you will be free to go wherever you choose, with enough money to begin properly. Elena let the silence hold for a moment. She was measuring the room, the man, the precise content of what had been proposed, the distance to the door, which was not a relevant calculation in terms of immediate action but which she noted from habit. And if I say no, she said. He did not answer immediately. He removed 2 photographs from the folder and placed them on the desk facing her. One was a building in Bologna, a second-floor window with a yellow curtain. She knew that window. Her sister Clara had chosen that curtain herself from a market stall 3 years ago and called Elena while she was choosing it to describe every available option before making her selection. The second was an elderly woman exiting a bank, Aunt Rita, 71, always in sensible shoes. She sent birthday cards in envelopes she decorated with small adhesive stickers because she maintained that birthdays should look festive from the outside. Dante said nothing more. He did not need to. The geometry was completely clear. Elena looked at the photographs for a measured moment. Then she looked at the man. She had survived her childhood. She had survived the years after it. She had survived the discovery of her father's actual self and 3 years of cleaning up after it alone. She had learned in that process that the only reliable way to survive something unavoidable was to understand it completely before you agreed to enter it. Every corner, every wall, every way through, then decide how you moved inside it. 2 years, she said. 2 years. My shop stays open. I keep running it. He considered. Within practical limits. I want that written in the document. Something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly. A small recalibration. He reached for the pen and added 2 sentences at the bottom of the document, already open on the desk. He pushed it toward her. She read every word. This took several minutes. He waited without impatience or commentary, without checking the time or shifting in his chair. When she finished, she picked up the pen. Her handwriting was clear and steady. She signed her name, set the pen down, and looked at him. He looked at her signature for a moment. You are not what I expected, he said. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and stood. No one ever is, she said. A man named Sal was assigned to her. He was 53, with the posture of someone who had been in the military once and had since reached an honest accommodation with middle age, and he showed her to her rooms with the efficient neutrality of a professional who had done this sort of task before and had developed a workable relationship with it. The rooms were large, the bed was good, the window looked over the east courtyard of the villa, which was overgrown and evidently untended, a stretch of old stone and unmanaged growth that looked less abandoned than simply forgotten. Someone had planted things in it once. She could see the structure underneath the neglect, the bones of what had been intended. This made her feel, fractionally, better than everything else she had seen in the last 2 hours. Neglect could be addressed. Having something addressable directly in front of you was always preferable to not. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. In the morning she washed her face, dressed, pulled her sleeves to her wrists with the automatic gesture she performed every morning without registering it as a gesture at all, and went to find the kitchen. She was going to be here for 2 years. She was not going to spend 2 years being unsure where the coffee was. That was a solvable problem. She would solve it first. The cook was a woman named Gloria, direct and efficient, who seemed to operate on the assumption that anyone entering her kitchen had already decided what they needed. She handed Elena a coffee without being asked. Black, no sugar. Exactly right. Elena wrapped both hands around the cup and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the forgotten courtyard below. She began, very quietly, to make plans. Clara called on the third day, as Elena had known she would. The message Elena had sent 2 days before, from a phone Sal had provided without comment, said she was working an extended project for a wealthy private client and would be harder to reach than usual. She had written it 3 times before sending, checking every word for anything that carried the wrong frequency. Nothing alarmed, nothing over-explained, the tone of a person who was professionally occupied and mildly inconvenienced, which was a register Clara had no particular reason to question. "You sound tired," Clara said. "I am always tired, you know that. Different tired. You sound like the tired you get when something is actually wrong and you are handling it alone and hoping I will not notice. I am handling something. It is temporary and it is under control. Tell me about the placement." Clara talked for 11 minutes. A supervisor who gave unclear feedback and then expressed confusion at the results. A boy in her class who had spent 6 weeks not understanding fractions and then, in the middle of a Thursday morning lesson, simply understood them, the understanding arriving on his face like a door opening in a dark room. A neighbor in her building who played music past midnight and left notes on the community board about the importance of shared spaces, which Clara found both hypocritical and personally targeted. Elena listened with complete attention. She responded at the right moments. She cared about all of it genuinely, which was not difficult, because Clara was one of 3 people in Elena's life whose life she cared about without reservation or complication. She asked 2 questions at the end that made Clara laugh, then they said goodbye. After she hung up, Elena sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in both hands for a moment. Then she stood, went down the corridor to a supply room she had located the previous day, found a pair of gardening gloves that clearly had not belonged to anyone recently, and went outside to the east courtyard. The weeds were deep and well established, the kind that had been growing undisturbed for years, and had gotten comfortable. She crouched in the far corner and started pulling. Under the weeds, the soil was dark and dense and rich. Good soil, built up carefully by someone who understood soil. This had been a real garden once, planned and tended with real intention, and then whoever intended it had gone, and the courtyard had been left, and time had moved in the way time moved in empty spaces, filling them with whatever came next. But the good soil was still here. The structure was still here. The intention was still readable under the years of neglect, if you knew how to read it. She worked steadily, clearing and stacking, moving from the far corner toward the center. Her hands knew this work thoroughly. Her whole body knew it. The tension she had been carrying in her shoulders since the previous afternoon, since 2 men in dark coats walked into her shop, began slowly and then more quickly to loosen. She did not hear him until his shadow fell across the ground in front of her. She looked up. Dante stood at the edge of the courtyard in his shirt, without a jacket, with his coffee, looking at what she was doing. He did not look displeased. He did not look pleased. He had the expression of a man who had come outside for a specific purpose and encountered something that was not part of that purpose, and was deciding what to do about the discrepancy. "There is a landscaping service," he said. "I know," she said, and went back to work. He stood there a moment longer. Then he turned and went back inside. She noted this carefully. A man who argued would have been easier to navigate. A man who said one thing and left without resolving anything was a more complicated variable. She catalogued it with the same attention she gave to everything in this house and kept working. The morning light moved in long bars across the courtyard stones. A bird was making a vigorous case for something in the cypress trees along the road. The city hummed far below the hill, going about its enormous, indifferent, generous life. She worked until her back asked her to stop. Then she stood and looked at what she had cleared. Not much yet, but a beginning. A clear, deliberate beginning. That was always the thing that mattered most, knowing what you were beginning before it was visible. The household had a rhythm that took her approximately a week to fully map. Dante was in his office from 7 in the morning. He ate breakfast alone, quickly, at his desk. He had meetings through the morning, usually with Owen, his underboss, a precise and serious man who moved through the house with the efficiency of someone who had decided that precision was a form of respect for other people's time. There were other men who came and went, different ones on different days, and Elena learned their faces and their purposes without appearing to be learning anything at all. She was good at this. She had been good at it since she was small. She ran her shop on the schedule Dante had agreed to, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with Sal driving her and waiting outside. Her customers noticed she was somewhat different, a different quality of distraction perhaps, but said nothing, in the way that certain people in certain cities were very good at not naming what they could see. She arranged flowers and advised people and helped a young man choose between pink peonies and white ones for an apology he owed to someone who had every right to remain unapologetic. Pink, she told him. White says you think you were right and are being generous. Pink says you know you were not. He bought the pink ones. She wrapped them carefully, without the paper rustling, a skill she had practiced for years. On the drive back that evening, she looked out at the sea and thought about the courtyard, and the next section she was going to clear, and whether the soil near the east wall was deep enough for what she was considering. She did not think about Dante Ricci. She almost believed that. He was in the courtyard when she got back. Not at the edge, watching this time, actually in it, standing near the section she had cleared last week, crouching down to look at something close to the wall. He heard the gate when she came through it and did not immediately look up. There are bulbs here, he said. She came to stand a few feet from him and looked at where he was pointing. Small, dry, pushed deep in the soil. Old ones. They had been there for a long time. Someone planted those with intention, she said. My grandmother, he said. He stayed crouched, looking at them. She spent every morning in this courtyard when I was young. She knew the name of everything growing here, and the name of everything she could see over the walls. I used to follow her around and ask the same questions over and over, and she always answered every time. He paused for a moment. I had not thought about that in years. Elena looked at the bulbs. She thought about a woman moving through this space in the morning with a small child following behind, asking the same questions again and again, and the woman answering each time without impatience, because she understood that children asked the same questions repeatedly, not because they had forgotten the answers, but because they were still building the thing the answer was part of. She thought about what it meant that the courtyard had been left, and the bulbs were still here anyway, deep in the soil, in the dark, patient. They will flower in spring, she said, if they have room. He looked up at her. The look she had come to partially recognize, a small recalibration occurring somewhere behind the steadiness of his expression. He nodded once, stood, and went back inside. She crouched over the bulbs and cleared the area around them carefully, giving each one space. The courtyard was quiet around her. The evening smelled of stone and the lavender she had begun planting along the south wall, and something faintly citrus from over the high wall to the south. She worked until the light was fully gone. The formal dinner happened on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after she arrived. Elena wore a dark green dress that fit as though it had been made for her, and about which she felt almost nothing in either direction. She sat at Dante's right hand at a table of 14 people, and spent 3 hours learning everything she could without appearing to learn anything at all. Most of the faces at the table had calculation behind the courtesy. She understood. She was a thing to be evaluated. She did not mind. Being evaluated meant being looked at, and being looked at gave her the opportunity to look back. She asked questions throughout the evening. Specifically, she asked questions she already knew the general shape of the answers to, because the difference between what someone says and what is actually true tells you more about a person than either thing alone. What they omit, what they reach for, what they assume you already know, and what they assume you cannot possibly understand. She learned quite a lot in those 3 hours. Rosa, Dante's mother, sat at the far end of the table. She was 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that had been beautiful for long enough to have settled into something more interesting than beauty. She watched her son with the deep, somewhat uncomfortable attention of someone who knew him well and was not entirely at ease with everything she understood about him. Toward the end of the meal, she leaned across and took Elena's hand in both of hers, warm and completely genuine. "We are glad you are here," Rosa said. Elena flinched. It was small and immediately controlled. The touch had been gentle and wholly unexpected, and her body responded before her mind could reach it. The old reflex, the one that lived in the nerves rather than in thought, the one that was older than most things she knew about herself. She turned it into a return squeeze, met Rosa's eyes with a smile that reached them just enough, and the moment continued. Across the table, Dante was looking at her. She felt it without meeting his eyes. When she finally glanced up, he was looking elsewhere, listening to something the man beside him was saying. His expression was unchanged. He had seen it. She was entirely certain of this. She was equally and inexplicably certain that he would not bring it up. She did not know how she knew. She knew it anyway. She was right. On the drive back, he sat on his side of the car and she sat on hers, and Naples moved past in its nighttime configuration. Neither of them spoke. At some point during the drive, he reached forward and adjusted the air vent. She had been cold. She had not said so. He moved it anyway. She sat still and watched the lit city pass outside and thought about that small and specific thing for a long time. October arrived cooler and cleaner than September. The south beds in the courtyard were cleared and built up properly now, the soil corrected, the lavender planted and establishing. The rosemary along the border paths had settled in and spread with the ease of something that had found the right place. The east wall section was cleared and ready. She was thinking about it every morning. The mornings had changed in a way that had not been announced. Dante had begun appearing in the courtyard. At first he arrived at the edge with his coffee, said one brief thing, and left. Then he stayed longer. Then the brief things became actual exchanges. She could not identify the morning when the shift occurred. She thought it had probably happened in a single unremarkable moment that neither of them marked, and that it was only visible when you looked backward at it. One of those October mornings, he crouched near the east wall and looked at the recently turned soil with what she had come to recognize was genuine attention rather than performed interest. "There are bulbs here," he said. She crouched beside him. In the soil, small and dry and pushed deep, the patient shapes of things waiting, old ones. They had been in this ground for a long time. "Someone planted those deliberately," she said. "My grandmother," he said. He stayed crouched, looking at them. "She spent every morning in this courtyard when I was young. She knew the name of every plant here, and could tell you anything about how it grew and what it needed. I used to follow her around asking questions, and she answered every single one, no matter how many times I asked the same thing." He stopped. I had not thought about her in this space in years. Elena looked at the bulbs. She thought about a woman who moved through this courtyard every morning naming things, with a small boy following and asking questions and being answered every time. She thought about what it meant that the courtyard had been left, and that the bulbs were still here underneath all of it, waiting in the dark, patient as soil. "They will flower in the spring," she said, "if they have space." He looked at her, the small recalibration she had learned to recognize. He nodded, stood, went back inside. She cleared the area around the bulbs with careful hands, giving each one room. The courtyard was quiet around her. The evening smelled of stone and lavender and something faintly citrus from over the south wall. She worked until the light was fully gone. Owen knocked on the office door twice on a Wednesday evening in late October. Received nothing. Knocked once more. Still nothing. The light was on under the door. There was no sound of work from inside. He stood in the corridor for a moment, then went quietly and handled the 3 things that needed handling that evening. He told no one about the door. Owen was a discreet man who had learned that certain observations were private property. Inside, Dante sat with his hands flat on the desk and looked at the wall. He had been reviewing the same sequence for 2 hours. The entrance hall. The 2 men from the Carlucci family sent as a careful provocation. The particular efficiency with which Elena had tracked the second man without moving, adjusting her position by a few degrees. The adjustment of someone assessing rather than panicking. The sound of fabric. His own movement across the room, which he barely remembered because it was not thought. It was simply something that happened. And then, her forearm. The scars, long and old and silver-faded. The specific signature of something survived years ago and never spoken of, covered every day with the same automatic attention that other people gave to putting on shoes. He had seen damage in its many forms. He had sat across from people carrying all varieties of it, and he had, if he was being honest with himself, been the cause of some versions of it in the course of the work he had always done. That was the arrangement with the world he had reached. You made peace with the actual shape of things rather than the shape they were supposed to be. You stopped looking at it too directly. You did what needed doing and moved forward. But he sat in his office and thought about a woman who got up every morning and covered her arms and ran a flower shop and paid down a dead man's debts one by one with money she earned herself, and signed a contract in his office with handwriting that did not waver, and then, the following morning, went outside to plant lavender in his grandmother's abandoned garden. He thought about the dinner where his mother had reached for her hand, and she had absorbed the contact with a speed and completeness that would have been invisible to anyone who was not specifically watching for something. He thought about the fact that he had constructed this arrangement as a transaction, had looked at a name attached to a debt and called it a variable, and had been, in some ways he was still identifying the exact shape of, wrong. He stayed in his office until the villa was quiet. Then he went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window. The courtyard was dark. He could see the cleared paths, the planted borders, the section near the east wall that had been given to the old bulbs. He stood at the window for a long time. The Carlucci men arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in September, which was technically before October, which meant the sequence had been building longer than anyone later said it had. Elena had been crossing the entrance hall with a stack of books she had taken from the study with Dante's permission, a general permission granted in a conversation that had taken 40 seconds, and which she had been faintly surprised he gave without question. She liked to read in the courtyard in the evenings after the gardening was done. She had not expected to be given access to the shelves without negotiation, which told her something small and specific about the man she had not yet had a full language for. She heard them before she saw them. 2 sets of footsteps that were moving too deliberately for household staff and too calmly for anything legitimate. She stopped in the middle of the hall and set the books on the side table, because books were not what she needed in her hands right now. They came through the entrance from the front corridor. 2 men, not large but careful, which was more concerning, the kind of careful that came from training rather than instinct. Mrs. Ricci, the first one said. He had a pleasant voice, which was worse than an unpleasant one would have been. "We are not here to cause trouble. We just want to have a conversation." Elena looked at him. She looked at the second man, who had moved to her left with the unhurried ease of someone who did this regularly. She adjusted her position by a few degrees. The adjustment brought her slightly closer to the door behind her and put the staircase post within reach to her right. She did not know if she would need either of these things. She was simply noting what was available. "Sal is just down the hall," she said. "He will hear if I call." "Sal is on a phone call," the first man said pleasantly. "He is going to be on that call for another few minutes." She understood then that this was not an accident, that the timing of the phone call and the timing of their arrival were the same plan. She felt the specific cold of that understanding settle through her, and then she felt herself do what she always did when that cold arrived. She stepped back from it and became very clear. Clarity was the thing she had instead of panic. She had learned this about herself long ago. "What kind of conversation?" she said. "About choices," he said. "About whether some arrangements might be renegotiated if the right people had a direct discussion." The second man moved closer on her left. She turned to track him. The first man reached for her arm. Her sleeve tore at the wrist seam, a clean sound. The grip was firm and she did not give in to it, which she could tell surprised him slightly, because people in her position were usually either screaming or completely still, and she was neither of those. She was simply not allowing the grip to establish itself as a fact. She heard the footsteps on the stairs before she saw him. Dante crossed the hall in a way she would not be able to describe accurately afterward. She did not look directly at the next 60 seconds. She looked at the wall to her right. She heard sounds. She heard voices. She heard the front door. The men left on their own feet, which meant either that Dante had exercised restraint or that he was making a different kind of point. She suspected the latter. The hall was quiet. She looked down at her arm. Her sleeve was torn from the wrist seam to about 4 inches up the forearm. The scars there were fully visible, long and pale and silver-faded, the old marks of old things, the kind that looked exactly like what they were to anyone who understood what to look for. She pulled the fabric together with her other hand. She composed her face before she turned around. This took less than 2 seconds. She had been doing it for long enough that the reflex was faster than thought. Dante was standing in the middle of the hall. He was looking at her arm, not at the torn sleeve, at the scars beneath it. He looked at them with the particular quality of a man who was making himself look at something directly rather than away from it, which was its own kind of thing to observe. Then he looked at her face. She met his eyes and held them. "Are you hurt?" he said. The question was precisely constructed. She noticed this even in the moment. It asked about the physical thing that had just happened, the grip, the struggle. It also asked, at an angle, at a degree of remove that gave her room to decline it, about the other thing, the thing that was now visible on her arm in the entrance hall of his house. "No," she said. He nodded. He walked to where she was standing and stood near her for a moment, not touching her, not doing anything performative. He simply stood near her, the way a person stood near something they wanted to make sure was steady before they moved on. "Come on," he said. He walked her to her wing himself. No Sal, no guards, just the two of them down the corridor, his pace matching hers exactly. He stopped at her door. She turned to face him. He looked like a man who had a great many things to say and had decided, with some effort, to say none of them. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. He turned and went back down the corridor. She closed the door, walked to the window, and stood looking out at the courtyard. The light was going. The lavender along the south wall was a pale gray-green in the fading light. The border paths were clear and clean. She was not falling apart. She had not fallen apart in a long time, and she was not going to do it now. She was simply standing at the window holding the specific weight of having been seen, which was different from everything else. Different from the other varieties of being looked at that she had experienced in her life. She was holding it the way you held something heavy that you had picked up before you were sure what it weighed, and you were still deciding whether to set it down or keep carrying it. She stood there until the courtyard was dark. Dante sat in his office for 2 hours after the entrance hall, and the file in front of him remained unopened. Owen knocked twice at some point, got no response. Did not knock a third time. He went and handled the 2 things that needed handling, and said nothing to anyone about the light under the door or the absence of sound from inside. Dante sat with his hands on the desk and did not open the file. He knew what those scars were, not from personal experience, from 20 years of operating in a world that contained every category of damage and occasionally required him to be in the same room with the aftermath of it. He knew the shape and the age and the specific variety of quiet that surrounded a person who carried something like that for a long time without making it anyone else's business. He thought about the way she had moved in the entrance hall, not panicking, not frozen, just the calm and specific movement of a person who had been in bad situations before and had learned what to do with themselves in one, which was a different skill entirely from never having been in a bad situation, and much more useful, and much more costly to obtain. He thought about the flower shop and the garden, and the dead man's debts paid one by one. He thought about the contract signed with level handwriting. He thought about her telling him that plants needed room to flower, about her at the dinner, about the flinch that had been contained in under 2 seconds and covered so completely that he would not have seen it at all if he had not been paying the specific kind of attention he paid to everything in his house. He thought about what he had built this arrangement to be, and what it had become, and the distance between those 2 things, which he was still measuring. He stayed in the office until the villa was fully quiet. Then he went downstairs. He stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking at the dark courtyard, the cleared paths, the lavender, the things she had built out here, one cleared section at a time. He stood there until the house went completely still around him. Then he went to bed and did not sleep for a while, and when he did sleep, he did not sleep well. He was not a man who usually had trouble sleeping. He noted this. He did not know yet what to do with the notation. The mornings changed again after that. Not in a way that was announced, not in a way that could be pointed to as a specific decision, but the quality of the courtyard mornings shifted, the same way light shifted between seasons, gradually, and then all at once if you had not been paying attention. He began asking questions in the courtyard, not the brief one-sentence exchanges they had been having, but actual questions with actual interest in the answers, about the plants, about what she was planning for the east wall, about why lavender worked along the south face and not the north. She answered all of them without any particular ceremony. He listened with the same quality of attention he gave to everything else, which was complete and non-performative. One morning she told him she was thinking about wisteria for the east wall. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "My grandmother had it on the east wall of the house I grew up in. It came back every spring for 40 years. After she died, it still came back." "That is what wisteria does," Elena said. "I know," he said. They stood looking at the east wall, both of them thinking about something that was not yet there but was clearly decided. She thought, "I did not expect this man to know what wisteria was." She thought, "I have been making incorrect assumptions in several directions." He told her about Marco on a morning in November, when the air had the thin clarity of a season that had decided to be honest about itself, and the first green tips of the bulbs had arrived above the soil, small and definite, and exactly on schedule. He said it without preamble, without her asking, while they were standing in the courtyard with their coffees and looking at what she had built out of the neglected space. My brother's name was Marco, he said. He was 3 years older than me. He was the one who was supposed to be running this family. That was decided before I was old enough to have an opinion about it, and it was probably the right decision. He was better suited to most of it than I was. She waited. Your father worked with him first, Dante said. Before the rest of the family, Marco trusted him completely, brought him into things that he should have protected more carefully. The money that was taken was not just money to Marco. It backed guarantees he had made to other people who had placed their confidence in him. When what your father had done became clear, Marco could not deliver what he had promised, and the people he had promised understood that a man who cannot deliver is a man who cannot be trusted. And when the trust withdrew, everything Marco had built on top of it came apart. He paused. Marco never recovered his steadiness after that. He lost his sense of what to do next. His family, eventually. His health, slowly. He died 14 months ago. Elena looked at the green tips in the soil. She thought about a man she had never met, losing his steadiness, losing everything built on top of it, one thing at a time. I am sorry, she said. She meant it without complication or ceremony. The arrangement I put in front of you was not, at its core, about recovering money, he said. You may have already understood something of that. He looked at her. It was about making something visible, making the statement that what was taken from this family has a consequence, that the people watching understood this family's word still meant what it always meant. It was about Marco, and what Marco lost, and what it cost him to lose it. He stopped. I want you to know that I understand what I put in front of you in exchange for that. Elena held her coffee in both hands. She looked at the courtyard she had built from a neglected space, and gardening gloves she had found in a supply room. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you have earned the real version, he said, not the version built for the people who were watching. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the rosemary along the border paths, the light smell of it lifting. My father knew what he was doing, she said. He was not innocent of the consequences for your family or for his own. When I found what he had left behind, I spent 3 years paying the pieces I could reach. Not because I owed it, because I cannot live inside a visible mess that I have a way to fix. That is simply how I am made. She looked at him. The 3 million was not in the pieces I could reach. I believe it is not findable. I believe he spent it at approximately the rate it came in, because that was the pattern of everything else he did. He always believed there would be more. I know, he said quietly, and she believed that he did, that he had known for some time, and had perhaps known before she arrived in his study that evening. They stood in the November courtyard and said nothing else for a while. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had said something true and were letting it settle. He refilled her coffee from the small pot he had started bringing out on mornings when she was already in the courtyard. She noted this. She had noted when it began. She had not mentioned it. She did not wake up changed the morning after the entrance hall. Elena had never trusted the idea of waking up changed. Change was not something that arrived cleanly in the night and was simply there in the morning. Change was the way the garden changed, in cleared sections, in root systems establishing themselves below the surface before anything was visible from above. You did not see it until you looked back from a distance. But she noticed things differently in the weeks that followed. She noticed that the household schedule had been quietly adjusted. No discussion, no announcement. The entrance hall was never empty during the hours when the house received visitors. When she crossed it, there was always someone nearby, not obviously, not obtrusively, but present. She noticed this and filed it. She noticed that Sal, who had always been professional and correctly neutral, now had a slightly different quality of attention, more specific, more alert, not watching her, watching the space around her. She noticed the distinction. She noticed that when she went to the shop on Tuesdays and Thursdays, there were 2 men outside rather than 1, and they were positioned differently than before. She noticed that Dante asked her, in the kitchen one morning, whether the current schedule for the shop was working well. He asked it with the tone of someone asking a genuine question, rather than one with a preferred answer already attached. The current arrangement is fine, she said. He nodded and poured his coffee and did not pursue it. She noticed that this was fine. She noticed that she had been using the word fine about things in this house with increasing accuracy. The garden moved forward into its next phase. The lavender along the south wall had established itself properly, the roots settled in, the plants beginning to spread with the confidence of something that had found the right place. The rosemary along the border paths did the same, spreading easily, the way plants spread when they were correctly placed. She began preparing the east wall section, the section she had been deciding about for weeks. The decision had made itself. It had been making itself, she thought, since the morning he had stood in the courtyard and told her about his grandmother's wisteria coming back every spring for 40 years, after she was gone. She ordered the plants through the nursery on the edge of the city. Sal drove her. She chose carefully, taking her time, and the nursery owner, a woman named Katerina who was 70, and had opinions about soil that she shared freely, approved of her choices in a way that felt like genuine endorsement rather than professional courtesy. On the drive back, sitting in the back seat with the young plants wrapped and secured, she thought about roots and what they required: time, depth, something solid to hold to. The right conditions, not perfect conditions. Nothing grew in perfect conditions, but the right ones, the conditions that were honest about what they were. She thought about that. He told her one more thing in November, on a different morning, one she had not planned for. She had been at the east wall, examining the soil one final time before she began planting, checking the depth and the composition and the drainage, and he had come out with the coffee, and the conversation had moved in the way it sometimes moved now, from the garden to other things, from other things to whatever was actually present in the space between them. He told her about his father. Not everything, not even most of it. 3 sentences. But the 3 sentences contained what she needed to understand several other things that had been open questions. She listened without asking anything, the way she listened when something important was being given to her in a small container, and she understood that the size of the container was the point. After the 3 sentences, they stood in silence. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You understand things without needing them explained in full," he said. "It is easier to talk to someone like that." She looked at the east wall. "Most people require very little explanation," she said, "if you give them the right pieces and trust them to assemble it." He looked at her. "You have a particular view of people," he said. "I have an accurate one," she said, "or as accurate as I can make it." "Is that a skill you were born with, or one you developed?" She considered this genuinely for a moment. "Developed," she said. "Necessity is a very thorough teacher." He was quiet. Then, "I know something about that." "Yes," she said, "I think you do." They planted the first section of wisteria that morning. He stayed in the courtyard while she worked, handing her things when she needed them without being asked, which was a skill of its own, knowing when a person needed something handed to them before they asked for it. She planted slowly and carefully, making sure each plant was set at the right depth, the roots given room to spread, the whole thing oriented to receive the morning light properly. She did not rush. Rushing the planting was how you produced something fragile. The whole point of wisteria was that it came back. To come back, it had to be placed correctly the first time. He watched her work with the same quality of attention he brought to most things, complete and unhurried. "It will be 2 or 3 years before it covers the wall," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You are planning for 2 or 3 years from now," she said. He met her eyes. "Are you not?" She looked back at the wall, at the young plants with their thin stems and their roots finally in the ground, with 2 or 3 years ahead of them before they became what they were always going to become. She did not answer him. She went back to planting. But she was smiling slightly, and they were both aware of it. Owen brought the formal communication through on a Thursday morning in late November. He presented it to Dante with the careful neutrality he reserved for things that had significant meaning, but that he had decided were not his meaning to express. He placed the envelope on the desk and said, "From the Carlucci family, through the standard channels." Standard channels meant formal. Formal meant considered. A communication sent through standard channels was a communication that someone had decided, deliberately and without haste, to send. Dante read it once, set it on the desk. The communication said several things with great economy of language. It said that recent events had been noted. It said that a certain evaluation had been conducted. It said that conclusions had been reached regarding the nature of certain commitments and the reliability of certain guarantees. It said these things in the language that such communications used, which was precise and devoid of sentiment and entirely clear to anyone who knew how to read it. What it said, translated, the statement had been made, the statement had been received, the account was settled. Owen waited by the door. "Thank you," Dante said. Owen left. Dante sat for a moment. He thought about the document in his safe, the one he had prepared 3 weeks ago without telling anyone. He thought about the woman in the courtyard planting wisteria that would take 2 or 3 years to cover the wall. He thought about the sequence of things he was about to say and the precision with which he needed to say them. He sat there for a while, thinking, which was a thing he did thoroughly when the stakes were high enough to require it. She was on the stone bench in the courtyard that evening, not working, sitting with her coat and her coffee, looking at the east wall in the last of the day's light. The wisteria was planted along the base of it now, thin and young and entirely committed to being there. He came out and sat on the other end of the bench. He gave it a moment. "I had papers prepared 3 weeks ago," he said, officially nullifying the debt. All of it, completely, with no future claim. She looked at him. "You can leave," he said. "Clara is safe, and will remain safe. Your aunt is untouched. Nothing will follow you. I will arrange whatever you require. Documents, money, to begin wherever you choose. Whatever you need." He said it evenly. Informational. She had spent enough months in this house, enough mornings in this courtyard, enough of these conversations to know the exact quality of his evenness when it was covering something. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the east wall, at the young wisteria stems, thin and newly planted, their roots in the ground now, committed to their 2 or 3 years of becoming what they were going to become. "I will think about it," she said. She went inside. The 3 days she thought about it were not entirely quiet. On Tuesday she went to the shop and arranged a large funeral order, all white, the kind of grief that did not want company or color, only the clean simplicity of white repeated in every variety the season could offer. She worked slowly and with her full attention, the way she always worked when she was also thinking about something else, because the two things did not interfere with each other, they ran alongside. She thought about the shoebox behind the panel in the closet. She thought about 3 years of quiet accounting, one name at a time, one settlement at a time, alone. She thought about what that had felt like and what it had built in her, which was not bitterness. She had deliberately refused bitterness because bitterness was expensive and unproductive, but something else, a particular kind of self-sufficiency, that was also a kind of loneliness, because the two things were often the same thing. She thought about arriving in this house expecting a cage and finding a neglected garden. She thought about a man who told her about Marco without being asked, about his father in 3 sentences, about his grandmother's wisteria, in the way someone shared something they had not known they were still carrying. She thought about the morning the Carlucci men came, and the way he had walked her to her door afterward, matching her pace, saying nothing performative. She thought about the bench in the courtyard, about what he had said, and the precision of the evenness in which he had said it, and what that evenness was covering. On the evening of the 3rd day she came downstairs, the main room, the main table, the same lamp, the same chairs. Dante was at the table with his work, going through documents with the focused quiet of a man who worked in the evening, because the work did not stop at any particular hour. He looked up when she came in. She sat down across from him, the same chair as the first night, the same table where the geometry of her situation had been laid out. She let the symmetry of it settle for a moment, acknowledged it privately, and moved forward. "I would like to renegotiate," she said. He set his pen down. "Not end it," she said. "Renegotiate, different terms." "What terms?" he said. "The shop," she said, "stays open permanently. Not within practical limits, not with conditions. Permanently and unconditionally, and I want that in writing without qualifications." "Agreed." "The garden is mine," she said. "I finish it on my own schedule. No landscaping service, no timeline, no input I have not requested." "Agreed." She looked at him. "And honesty," she said. "The real version of things, the way you told me about Marco. When something concerns me, when it is relevant to me, I want the true version and not the version assembled for other purposes." He was quiet for a moment. The room was still. The city was somewhere below, going about its enormous and completely indifferent business. "Agreed," he said. She nodded. She sat there for a moment and let the new shape of it exist in the room, the unfamiliar shape of something not yet named but clearly present. Like the wisteria, she thought. You could not see what it was going to become yet, but it was in the ground. The roots were down. The direction was decided. Your grandmother's bulbs, she said. They are further along than you would expect. You should come and see them in the morning. Something moved across his face. She had been building a vocabulary for that expression over the past months. She had enough of it now to know what she was reading. It was the expression of a man who had set out to manage something and had been, somewhere along the way, without entirely planning to be, surprised into caring about it. A man who was still making peace with the distance between where he had started and where he actually was. I will come, he said. She stood. She straightened her jacket. Her hand moved to her sleeve, the automatic reach, the familiar covering motion, the gesture she had made every morning for years, without noticing that she was making it. And then she noticed. She stood in the lamplight of that room in that house, and she noticed her own hand at her own sleeve, and she held still, not pulling the sleeve up, not leaving it down as a statement, not making it into anything at all, simply noticing that it was a choice, that it had always been a choice, that the choice was hers in a way that, for a long time, not many things in her life had been completely and cleanly hers. She let her hand fall. She said good night. He said good night. She walked upstairs through the still house. The city was lit through the windows, alive and enormous and entirely itself. In the dark outside, the courtyard waited, the lavender and the rosemary, and the cleared paths and the bulbs that were arriving in the east corner, and the young wisteria along the east wall, all of it patient and deliberate and growing in the dark, becoming what it was always going to be. She went to her room. She stood at the window for a moment. She looked at the courtyard below and the lit city beyond it. Then she turned off the light and lay down. She moved to the center of the bed this time. She slept. Spring arrived the way spring always arrived in Naples, not gently and not all at once, but in a series of insistent arguments with winter that spring gradually and definitively won. The mornings were still cool in February, but the light had changed, longer and more direct, and in the east corner of the courtyard the bulbs were fully above the ground now, green and purposeful, on their way to becoming what they had been waiting in the cold dark to become. Elena stood in the courtyard on a February morning with her coffee, and looked at them. 6 months since she had arrived. 6 months since she had cleared this space with borrowed gloves, and a plan she was still building while she executed it. The lavender along the south wall was established and spreading with quiet confidence. The rosemary along the border paths was dense and fragrant and had begun to crowd itself, which meant she would need to divide it before April. The east wall held the young wisteria, still thin, still working on its roots, but with the unmistakable look of something that had committed to a location. She heard the gate. She did not turn around. She knew the particular weight of his footsteps on the courtyard stones by now. She knew them the way you came to know sounds that were part of your daily structure. He handed her a fresh coffee. He looked at the bulbs. They are going to be extraordinary, he said. They are going to be exactly what they were, she said, which is enough. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the east wall, at the wisteria working its slow and patient way toward becoming. I spoke to Owen this morning, he said. The situation with the northern families has resolved. She nodded. She had known, from the quality of the house in the past 2 weeks, that something had resolved. The specific tension of a situation in process was different from the settled quality of one that had concluded. She had learned to read the house the way she read the garden, by the quality of what was present and what was absent. Cleanly? She said. Yes, he said. Completely. She drank her coffee. The morning light was moving across the courtyard stones in the particular way it moved in late February, at the angle that told you the year had turned a corner and was now moving in the other direction. My mother wants to have a family lunch, he said. Next Sunday. She has been asking since September, and I have been saying it was not the right moment. She believes the right moment is any moment she decides it is. Elena smiled, which she did more frequently now, and which she noticed that she noticed less frequently. She is probably correct. She is usually correct, he said. She finds this as irritating as everyone else does. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden with a slight expression she had spent 6 months developing the vocabulary for. She had it now, she thought. She had enough of it. Yes to the lunch, she said. He looked at her. You do not have to. I know that, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. He went back inside. She stood in the courtyard and looked at the bulbs and thought about Sunday lunch with a woman who took your hand warmly and meant it and made you flinch and did not know it. She thought about how, the next time Rosa took her hand, she was going to let it be simply what it was, a hand, warmth. No older weight than that. She could not promise she would achieve it, but she was going to try. That was something. Rosa's Sunday lunch was enormous, elaborate, and held in the main dining room with the long windows open to the garden air. There were 12 people at the table. Elena knew half of them, and had studied the other half from a distance in the months she had been here. Rosa greeted her at the door with both hands, and held them, and did not let go immediately. And Elena stood in that hold and breathed steadily, and let it be what it was. Her hands did not shake, they were warm. It was not a triumph. It was a small thing, a Tuesday-level thing, an unremarkable piece of an ordinary Sunday, but she noticed it anyway and was quietly satisfied. She sat beside Rosa during the meal, and they talked for an hour, in the particular way of women who have decided, without formal negotiation, that they are going to like each other. They talked about the garden and about Rosa's mother's garden, which had been the model for the courtyard design, and about the specific qualities of the Naples soil compared to the soil in the town outside the city where Rosa had grown up. They talked about Clara, because Elena mentioned her and Rosa asked the right questions, and Elena found herself describing her sister accurately, and at length in a way she had not done with anyone here before. Across the table, Dante was talking to Rosa's brother, a large, cheerful man named Victor who had the energy of someone who believed most problems in the world could be solved through food and direct conversation. Dante was listening to him with genuine attention and responding with brief, precise observations that made Victor laugh. She watched this. She had never seen him in an entirely relaxed social context before. He was not uncomfortable. He was not performing. He was simply present in the way he was in the courtyard in the mornings, genuinely attending to what was in front of him. He caught her looking at him at some point during the meal. Neither of them made anything of it. They both looked elsewhere, but she was aware that he had seen her looking, and she was aware that he was aware of what she had been watching for, and she was aware that he was aware that she was aware of that. And she thought, this is what it is to know someone. This particular layering of mutual recognition. She thought, I did not plan to know anyone here. She thought, plans were never the thing I was actually good at. Execution was. In March, the bulbs flowered. She was not in the courtyard when it happened. She came outside one morning, and they were simply there, white and purple and extraordinary in the east corner, exactly what they had been waiting in the dark all autumn and winter to become. She stood and looked at them for a long time. She heard the gate. She did not turn around immediately. Your grandmother's, she said. Yes, he said. He stood beside her, and they both looked at the flowers. 40 years in this soil, she said. At least, he said. The flowers were not dramatic. They were just present, completely, and without qualification, the way things were present when they had always been going to be. She thought about the dark and the cold and the patience required, and the fact that none of it had been visible, and none of it had required witnessing to be real. I was thinking, she said, that I would plant the ranunculus along the west path. They need to go in next month. What color? He said. All of them, she said. Every color at once. He was quiet for a moment, then. That sounds right. She looked at the flowers for another moment, then she went to get her gloves. He stayed in the courtyard. She could hear him moving around as she worked, not interfering, not directing, just present in the space, which was something she had stopped analyzing and started simply accepting, the way you accepted the sound of the city below or the smell of the rosemary in the morning air. She planted the ranunculus bulbs along the west path in the cool March light, working slowly and carefully, giving each one the right depth and the right distance from its neighbors. She worked the way she always worked, with her full attention on what was directly in front of her. She thought, in 3 months, these will be every color at once. She thought, I will be here to see it. Clara came to visit in April. Elena had told Dante about the visit 2 weeks in advance. He had said, simply, of course, and made no other comment. The guest room was prepared. Clara arrived on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a bag that was too large for a weekend, and a box of pastries from the best place in Bologna, with the confidence of someone who believed that pastries were the correct approach to any unfamiliar situation. She stood in the entrance hall of the villa and looked around her with the specific expression Elena had been seeing on Clara's face since they were small, the expression of a person who was taking in a great deal of information very quickly and organizing it at the same time. "This is where you have been," Clara said. "Yes," Elena said. "It is not what I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "Something less like a house and more like a fortress." "It is both," Elena said. "Come in." She showed Clara the garden. This took a long time. Clara asked questions the way she always had, detailed and specific and persistent, the kind that required real answers rather than summary ones. Elena gave real answers. The lavender and why that wall. The rosemary and why those paths. The wisteria and why the east. The bulbs in the corner that had been waiting in the soil for more than 40 years and had flowered in March as if no time had passed. "Someone loved this space," Clara said. "Yes," Elena said. "And then it was left." "Yes. And then you came and built it back." Elena looked at the courtyard. "I did not build it back. I built something that grew from what was already here." Clara looked at her with the particular attention of a younger sister who had spent a lifetime paying attention to the spaces between things her older sister said. "You are different," Clara said. "I am the same," Elena said. "Differently the same," Clara said, which was a distinction Elena did not argue with. Dante came into the courtyard at some point in the afternoon. He was not aware, Elena thought, that Clara was the kind of person who assessed situations rapidly and completely, and communicated her assessments without waiting to be asked. He discovered this quickly. "You take care of her?" Clara said, with the directness of a 23-year-old who had decided this conversation was happening now. He looked at her. Then he looked at Elena, who was carefully not looking at anyone. "She takes care of herself," he said. "I try not to be something additional she has to manage." Clara considered this for a moment. Then she gave one small nod, the specific nod Elena recognized as Clara's version of accepted, which was a significant thing to receive from Clara. Later in the evening, after Dante had excused himself and gone to deal with something Owen needed, Clara sat with Elena on the bench in the courtyard in the warm April evening and said nothing for a while. "He watches you," Clara said. "I know," Elena said. "Not like that," Clara said, "like he is trying to make sure you are all right without making you aware he is checking." Elena looked at the courtyard. "I know," she said. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Are you?" she said. Elena thought about it, really thought about it, not the reflexive answer, not the competent answer, not the answer designed to manage Clara's concern. "I am getting there," she said. Clara nodded. She took Elena's hand and held it, and Elena let her, and did not flinch, and they sat there in the April evening with the courtyard around them, the lavender and the rosemary and the bulbs that had flowered, and the wisteria on the east wall that was going to cover it by summer, if it continued at the rate it was going. "The flowers are beautiful," Clara said. "They were always there," Elena said. "They just needed room." Clara looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the garden. "Yes," Clara said, who understood exactly what her sister was saying, and was going to let her say it that way. May came, and the wisteria was further along than Elena had projected. The stems had thickened over winter, and the growth in spring had been vigorous and climbing, reaching for the wall with the quiet confidence of something that had decided this was the right direction, and was not going to be convinced otherwise. She stood back and looked at it on a morning in late May with her coffee, and thought about what it would be in a year, in 2 years. She thought about the conversation on the bench in November, in the cold, when he had told her she could leave, and offered to arrange whatever she needed. She thought about sitting across from him at the main table afterward and saying, "I would like to renegotiate." She thought about his face when she said it, the specific quality of the stillness in it, the things he had said after, the things they had not needed to say. She thought about the fact that she had moved to the center of the bed and had not moved back. She heard the gate. She did not turn around. "Sal says the wisteria is ahead of schedule," he said. "Sal has been paying attention," she said. "Sal pays attention to everything in this house," he said. "It is one of his more useful qualities." She smiled at the wall. "He is not wrong. It should reach the first-floor window by August." He stood beside her and they both looked at it. The morning light was full and direct and the wisteria was lit in it, green and reaching, with the first small clusters of bud forming along the new growth. "I would like to talk to you about something," he said. She looked at him. He looked at the wall for a moment, and she recognized this. She knew this quality of pause. The pause before the real version. "There are things I would like to change," he said, "about the arrangement." The specific terms. She waited. "I would like them to change because they are accurate," he said carefully. "Not because they are strategically useful. Not because of what other people can see. Because they are the true version of what this is." She looked at the wisteria. She looked at the bulb corner where the flowers had been, and were now finished and resting, storing what they needed for next year. She looked at the lavender and the rosemary, and the cleared paths she had built from neglect with borrowed gloves. She thought about a man who rolled his sleeves to the elbow and read documents before he looked up and waited without impatience, and told her the real version because she had earned it. She thought about the center of the bed. She turned to look at him. "What terms?" she said. He looked at her, the full look, not the sideways look he sometimes used when he was being careful, but the direct one. The one she had learned was the look he used when he had decided something and was done being careful about it. "All of them," he said. "New ones, that we write ourselves." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the east wall. The wisteria was thin and strong and climbing, reaching for the wall with complete certainty, its roots deep in the good soil, its direction decided, 2 or 3 years ahead of it, before it was fully what it was going to be. "All right," she said. She went to get her gloves. There was planting to do. He stayed in the courtyard. She could hear him behind her, making himself at home in the space she had built, in the space that had been built by someone who was gone, and that she had rebuilt into something that was hers, and would now be theirs. Outside, above them, the city of Naples went about its ordinary and extraordinary business. The morning moved, the light moved, the wisteria climbed. And somewhere in the east corner, deep in the soil, in the dark and the patience of it, the bulbs were already building toward next spring.